Donald Trump's plan to end the Russia-Ukraine war was heavily revised during Geneva negotiations. It was cut from 28 to 19 points. The specific provisions removed haven't been specified. However, this happened after Kiev and its European allies pointed out the unacceptability of a number of demands in this document. Thus, Ukraine reiterated its red lines on limiting the armed forces' size and making territorial concessions, including surrendering Donbass. Europe supported Ukraine and pointed out its exclusive right to make decisions regarding frozen Russian assets and the lifting of sanctions imposed by Brussels. Europeans say, Vitkov, don't get ahead of yourself. You suggested lifting Russia's sanctions gradually, but did you consult us? Actually, we were the ones who imposed these sanctions, and in fact, these Russian assets are frozen in Europe, in Belgium. And now, the White House is saying that the previous peace plan was not Donald Trump's plan, and that he wasn't even properly familiarized with it. Overall, Trump is no longer requiring Zelensky to accept the plan by November 27. Meanwhile, early behind-the-scenes details of the Geneva negotiations are emerging. And it turned out that they almost fell apart in the very first minutes. So what has changed in this peace plan? Let's discuss this. My name is Pechiy. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pechiy News. The link is in the description of this video. There we post breaking news as it comes in. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, you can do so with any donation or a paid sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. Thank you. So, at the meeting between representatives of the United States and Ukraine in Geneva, the parties prepared an updated and revised framework document on peace. They also agreed that the future agreement must fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty. This was the official statement of the Office of the President of Ukraine. Quote, "The discussions demonstrated significant progress in aligning positions and defining clear next steps. The parties confirmed that any future agreement must fully respect Ukraine's sovereignty and ensure sustainability. As a result of the negotiations, the parties prepared an updated and revised framework document on peace." In the coming days, consultations will continue, but the final decision on this framework document will be made by the presidents of both countries, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. And now it is already known that the United States' plan to end Russia's war against Ukraine was significantly revised at these negotiations in Geneva. It was reduced a lot. There were 28 points now, just 19 remain. And what's notable is that this happened right after Kiev and the European allies came and said, listen, there are a number of points in this plan that are unacceptable to us, and we are not going to go along with them. And by the way, Financial Times sources write that the negotiations almost broke down at the very beginning because of such heightened emotions. Ukraine and the Europeans immediately made it clear to the Americans that the negotiations would be very lengthy and no one was going to make any critical concessions. No matter how much Trump wanted to please Vladimir Putin, so Ukraine reminded everyone about its red lines. They said they won't reduce the army and no one is going to give up any territory just like that. Besides, Europeans are saying, listen, why are you asking Ukraine to agree to this? That it will never join NATO? Europeans say actually whether Ukraine joins NATO or not depends on consensus within NATO itself, not on the opinion of some unwashed Russians. Europe also emphasized its sole authority over decisions about frozen Russian assets and lifting Brussels-imposed sanctions. Hinting that, listen, if you go so far as to lift sanctions on Russia, don't expect us to do the same in sync. Today, the advisor to the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine. In turn, United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that there has been tremendous progress in finding a solution. According to him, the plan still needs some work, but there is reason to expect that agreements can be reached within a reasonable time frame. The final text will have to be approved by the presidents of the United States and Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump, after which the document will be sent to Moscow. And here, Donald Trump himself decided to highlight this very topic. He writes so mysteriously today. Although before that he insisted that Ukraine accept the plan by November 27, he then stated that the proposed document is actually not the final offer from the United States. And here it's important to immediately dispel the loud manipulations. Guest Secretary of State Marco Rubio said yesterday that he supposedly hadn't heard anything about the European annex to the peace plan. And here, especially Russians rushed to sarcastically claim that the Europeans were sent away and there were no proposals from Europe at all. Like, there was no peace plan from Europe, and Rubio, you see, confirmed it. But first of all, the Europeans proposed their own peace plan, which was written based on the American one. That's no secret. In fact, even Friedrich Merz said this directly, that this is not an alternative peace plan, it's a counter-proposal, because in Europe's opinion something needs to be changed in the original peace plan. These counter-proposals were coordinated with Ukraine, and it was the Ukrainian delegation that brought them up for discussion with the Americans. As a result, we ended up with a peace plan not of 28, but of 19 points. Therefore, yes, it's not correct to say that Europe presented its own peace plan. It's easier and more convenient to share information this way, avoiding complicated definitions. Of course, I can always say on air that Europe presented its own counter-proposal to fix the provisions in the original peace plan proposed by the United States of America, developed by Stim, Vitkov and Dmitriev. But that's very complicated, and why make it more complicated? It's easier to just say that Europe proposed its own peace plan, since we always use quotation marks. But I want to draw your attention to one key statement by Mark Rubio, which emphasizes that there were at least two versions of the peace plan. Quote, "The goal was to take these 28 or 26 points, depending on which version we take, and focus on those that are still open. We've made significant progress today, but the final plan must still be coordinated with the president. But I think today was probably the most productive day in a long time." Mark Rubio confirms there are two versions and they've been working with both. In short, Europe suggested in its counter-proposal not to touch the Ukrainian army at all. They say in peacetime 800,000 no less don't recognize the occupation or give up any territories. Maintain Ukrainian ship passage on the Dnipro, control the Kinburn Spit, and retain Ukraine's control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. And, importantly, no Russian veto right over Ukraine's accession to NATO. And after the negotiations in Geneva, President Alexander Stubb of Finland stated, and I quote, "Significant issues remain unresolved." He also added that all issues falling under the competence of the European Union or NATO will be discussed in a completely separate format. The Russians have already rejected the new peace plan. As the saying goes, they condemn it without having seen it. Putin's aide Ushakov stated that many provisions from the old 28-point plan are suitable for Russia, but the new ones, especially those that are not constitutional, are constructive and not suitable. So, despite all the optimism yesterday and today, this round of the fight for Trump is far from over, and its outcome is still undetermined. Now the question is, whose side will Trump ultimately take? I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.